Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, June 3rd, 2021, and I want to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research Channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. All right, guys, well, if you've been following along on my channel, as you know, I just covered the accounts of the quote unquote giants or large hominids in part two of my series looking into these accounts international. We covered China and Japan recently, and as you might have noticed, there's a sharp contrast in the type of archaeology and anthropology that's being done in the East as opposed to the West. That seems to be, sort of, open-minded and honest reporting when, as far as the reporting is concerned, when it comes to these finds. Whereas, the Western one seems agenda-driven, so I had remarked about this while reading the accounts, and of course, people are going to say, "Well, that comes from Chris Leslie's Greater Ancestors Museum website there," and it's sort of a biased opinion in there as far as Chris Leslie is concerned. Well, that may be true, but for good reason, as we know. But independently of that, let's take a look at some of these more contemporary articles that concern themselves with more recent finds of these large skeletal remains in Asia first. I'm going to cover a couple of articles from Asia, one in China and the other one in Malaysia. And then I'm going to cover one from Poland. And just take a look at these and, you judge for yourself and see which ones are, providing actual good journalism, providing, related and concomitant facts about, that would concern themselves with these finds as opposed to, what we might find is more of like sort of a propaganda driven agenda. And we know what that is. And again, it has a lot to do with the whole gigantism and acromegaly thing because, the Western academics are closed minded when it comes to these things, with few exceptions, except perhaps that one professor from Britain, I believe, that, Harry Hubbard had turned me on to that article of the giants in Ecuador. There, we covered that article where they was, not mentioning gigantism or acromegaly at all. When these skeletal remains are looked at with sort of inquisitive eye instead of this sort of agenda driven one. So let's take a look at some of these articles here, and you judge for yourself. And then of course we comment on several things in these articles here because it's worth mentioning just more accounts of the giants in these areas. So let's take a look at them. These first, like as I said, the first couple of articles are from Asia. So one of them is from China. This one here from the Independent, and again, you judge for yourself who is providing an honest look at these things and an agenda driven look at these things. Okay, skeletons of 5,000-year-old Chinese giants discovered by archaeologists. The people are thought to have been unusually tall and strong. Okay, and being that they're unusually tall and strong, again, we found the accounts of the giants in the Americas when they were looked at by, academics and professionals. They had commented that, people of strong frame, indicating that, where the muscles attached to the bones, so these people were extremely, muscular and strong. So again, it first implying here that no gigantism, because we know all about gigantism, and this is not what this is. So there it is, one of these giants, because there are several of them unearthed in these areas. Okay. Archaeologists in eastern China found 5,000-year-old skeletons of people experts say would have been unusually tall and strong. According to measurements of the bones in the graves at the site in Shandong province, a number of people would have measured at 1.8 meter or taller, with one man estimated to have been 1.9 meter. Xinhua news agency reported. Okay, so 1.8 meter tall is pretty much almost average height for today's standards, but being back then, and again, the information provided by the people who are studying these things will indicate what the average size of the people in the locality is. It's not particularly tall, 5'9" by Western American standards, and 1.9 meter would be something like 6'2", 6'2" here in America. Okay, so not particularly tall by Western standards, but back at those times, according to scientists, that would be people of unusual height, and people of unusual height, according to academics, is not easy to explain for several different reasons. Although not particularly unusual by 21st century Western standards, it is thought that their height would have seen them tower over many of their contemporaries. This is just based on bone structure. If he was a living person, his height would certainly exceed 1.9 meter. Fang Hui, head of Shandong University School of History and Culture, told the agency. So there's two things to consider here: is that the skeletal remains shrink over time. That's one thing, and including when these people were alive and had flesh on their bodies, that also would increase their overall size and actual size when they were living, as compared to these shrunken bones when they're been deceased for millennia. Locals in Shandong see their height as a defining characteristic. A study conducted in 2015 found the average height of 18 men to be 1.753 meter, compared to the country's national average of 1.72. So they're slightly taller in those areas for whatever reasons. So 1.7 would be something like 5'6" in by American standard. Confucius, who was born, and this is very interesting to me, Confucius, who was born in what is now the Shandong province, was reportedly 1.9 meter tall. That's over 6 foot tall. So here's one of these men of renown being particularly tall. And where we heard that before so many times. So something else to take into consideration when looking at the past through the prism of the giant humanoids that lived in the past of all different varieties, I might add. Again, we have to consider this as well, okay, and especially from what we've heard in the accounts so far. All right, that these rather large hominids or humanoids, seeming humanoids in many cases, um, had all different morphologies, all different kind of physical characteristics to their skeletal anatomy and structure of their whole overall being. Okay. Some of them were like long and thin, like let's say the Watusi people, who are, clear evidence of living giants today. Okay, over 7 foot tall and rather sort of thin and tall like that, in contrast to the Fiji chiefs of the Fiji Islands, which is built like Andre the Giant. So many of these sort of humanoid species of the past evidently had different morphologies and all things to consider. When they also say, like the pyramids, people have, considered that perhaps large humanoid people built the pyramids. And so why are the passages so narrow, and, who would fit through there, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's two things to consider here as far as I'm concerned. I've related this to also the stone chambers of the northeastern part of North America here, is that, and I based this on what LAH Russia said, okay, about looking around the structures around the Great Pyramid in Egypt and how they looked to them to be like bunkers. Okay, so what was the Great Pyramid? Was that like a shelter for the royalty, but not the royalty adults? It was always the children, and this is just what's so common in nature and natural for animal species everywhere, to protect the young, always protect the young above and, beyond themselves, self-sacrificing for their offspring, whatever. These pyramids could have been the fallout shelters there for, especially what was going on. The whole surface of the planet was being rearranged back then, not too far distant past, but another thing to think about. But were they like, bunkers or fallout shelters for, the children of the royalty of these giant classes, including the ones that were in Egypt there with the elongated skull? It seemed to be a hybrid of elongated skull and giant, which I'm sure there was in the past. All sorts of hybrids existed in the past, it seems to be, right? So it's interesting to me that they say Confucius here is particularly tall. Another one of these men of renown, okay, of unusual height, 6'2", in his time would have been, again, what these people say, towering over people who, you know, in the local provinces there is, basically like 5'6" tall today, and they're supposedly shorter in the past. So, you know, let's say you were 5'3" in the past, so somebody who's 6'2" is going to be, a real big guy by comparison. The excavation site in the village of Zhaojia near Jinan City has been found to hold 104 houses, 205 graves, and 20 sacrificial pits. A number of colorful pots and jade articles were also recovered. Archaeologists have been uncovering artifacts and bones from the late Neolithic people since last year, who are understood to have lived mostly off pigs and millet. Okay, so let's just put that aside for a second because, the place is surrounded by water, by the way. And I would like to see what the teeth of this skeleton look like up close. But let's not go there right now. Just the people living in the region 5,000 years ago are believed to have had relatively comfortable lives. The rows of houses that have been excavated suggest their living quarters had separate bedrooms and kitchens, according to China Daily. So very sophisticated people living in a sort of, you know, arrangement there, houses arranged in a particular fashion, for comfort and ergonomic reasons. The area is also believed to have been the political, cultural, and economic center of the Chinese region. Oh, that's very interesting too. So, where these tall people live, these exceptionally tall people live, was the political, cultural, and economic center of the Chinese region for who knows how long. Taller men were found buried in larger graves, which could be due to them having higher status and having access to better food. So here we go with, they're assuming from research that's already been done, which has already been completely negated because the simple fact that the whole human race has stopped growing for some reason. So, and they can't figure that out. So pretty much all their theories about growth in height, you could just throw them out the window because they don't pertain to anything now. Their reasoning would suggest that we should just continue to keep on growing and growing and growing and getting taller and bigger and all that kind of stuff. And we're not. So, You could throw that whole better food on because plenty of people have better food and they haven't grown significantly at all. Only 3.3 centimeters in the past, 200 years, with that basically being like uh, we've only grown 10 centimeters over the past 200 years and 3.3 inches. So it's nothing. So I believe that's just the end of the article there. These are very short articles, and it's good that they are. So they assume all of these things based on current research, which is completely no good. But you notice how no gigantism or acromegaly was mentioned in the article, and they also included these averages of height, pertinent and relative information to what we would want to know. Okay, not a long lecture about gigantism and acromegaly, which seems to be every article from the West. But we're getting there, don't worry. Just another one. Okay, so this is from the Stars, news online e-paper newspaper, which is Asian newspaper from Malaysia here, and another interesting find here, and this is in Malacca, Malaysia. A historian claims to have discovered skeletal remains of what is believed to be a larger than usual man in a cave in Pula Upa, off the coast here. Mod Fuad Kusari M. Said, who was appointed by the Malacca government to search for new historical sites, said he discovered some bones partially exposed above the ground in Pula Upa. He also found two other unusually large graves some 1.2 kilometers outside the cave. The grave, measuring about 5 meter by zero point 0.5 meter, are located about 15 meter to 20 meter away from each other. I have reported the findings to the authorities because we have no right to excavate the site without permission, he told the Star yesterday. He said the discovery could be proof to validate claims that the early settlers in Malacca, including during the Malay Sultanate, were large in structure. So here we are going into the past here with larger people in the past, not smaller people. See, this is what mainstream contends. Okay, somehow all around the world, going further into back into the past, and people are getting bigger for some reason and not smaller like they claimed is supposedly the case. The historian, who has 10 years experience in archaeological studies, said based on the size of the skull and the length of the bones, the remains could measure between 3 meter and 5 meter long. Moldford said the length of the skeletal remains matched the large graves of the Sultan Arifin and 7 warrior brothers in Pula Besar. Probably just another burial site with more large skeletal remains. There was no excavation work at any of these grave sites, thus the tales of the giant settlers remains a myth. However, the research on this latest find could help prove or disprove claims that giant-sized men roamed Malacca a long time ago, he added. He said there were historical records of sightings of giant races dating back to the Mayans and even as recently as 1871, when a newspaper reported the finding of some 200 giant skeletons in Cayuga, Ontario, Canada. So it's not so strange to have sighting of giants in this part of the world, and we need to carry out an in-depth research into such claims, said Maud Fuad. There have been previous findings in quote-unquote gigantic graves in Pula Basar here, believed to belong to Muslim religious leaders from Yemen, Saudi Arabia, India, and Java, who came to Malacca to spread Islam during the early days of the Malacca Sultanate. Institute of Historical and Patriotism Studies of Malaysia chairman Professor Datuk Wira Dr. Mo Jamil Mukmin said that the graves were huge compared to modern ones. These could probably be due to the size of those buried in those graves, or they were dug larger than usual as an honor to them for spreading Islam in this part of the world, he said yesterday. He said Pula Opa was once a base for Javanese religious leaders who traveled to the port of Malacca to conduct Islamic classes for the locals and traders in the 15th century, while the giant-sized graves in Pulau Besar mostly belonged to those from Yemen. Chief Minister Datuk Seri Idris Haran said he had been informed of the latest finding in Pulau Ubah. Yes, we have commissioned the historian to provide facts about the undiscovered historical sites, and research was ongoing for the latest discovery of giant-sized remains, he said. Idris said he was told that villagers from the mainland had placed tombstones on the graves a few years ago. Malacca's Barisan National Social Service Center Director Amir Hamza Aziz said the story of the mysterious giant's remains in Pulau Upa had been circulating since the 1990s. Many claim to have sighted the remains there, and if it is true, we must preserve it for the future generation, he said, adding that there could be some truth to claims that early settlers in Malacca were much larger than the current population. Okay, so here we have two articles from Asia, no mentions of gigantism or acromegaly, and seems to be completely open to it and open to these ideas, and you know looking to preserve this for posterity and future generations, etc., etc. There were larger peoples there in the past. Okay, so you get the completely different mindset of what's going on in the East here, as we've heard from these articles about these large scale remains being found in the West. Okay, and if we're already gone over on the channel several articles where these large scale remains have been found, and again, the repeating theme of gigantism and acromegaly, which seems to be, in my opinion, and based on these, this Asian perspective here, just nothing more than a political driven agenda. Okay, that's motivated by Western science and academics to prevent us from discovering of these large hominids that existed in the past, these humanoid type creatures, et cetera, because if that's true, then their degrees aren't worth the paper that they're printed on, and they're not going to have that. So let's go on to take a look at this article from Poland. And again, you be the judge of how well written or what it is that you're supposed to be gaining from these, this sort of, science journalism that's being done in the West. And this last article here from large scale remains being found in Poland is in Forbes magazine. Steve Forbes there, which I don't think he runs or controls the magazine anymore. He sold it a long time ago, I think. And this Christina Kilgrove, who's the journalist, who's the author of this article, who's a former contributor, archaeologist, writer, scientist, okay. Skeleton of medieval giantess unearthed from Polish cemetery, okay. So we'll see how well written this article is and what we're finding out and learning about this find here. Western style. And it's apparently the skull. Skull of woman with gigantism from grave 2377, Ostroledniki, Poland. Just outside of the medieval church of the Ostroledniki stronghold in Poland, archaeologists from the Museum of the First Piast at Lednica have unearthed the strange burial of a giant. So it's a strange burial. And it is. It's a strange burial, but, to them it's just, odd. Let's not try to make any sense out of it. The woman's skeleton showed that she reached a towering height of 7 foot 2 inches, but also that her short life was full of traumatic injuries and disease. The giantess was found in a cemetery that was once used solely by the elite of the area, dignitaries, the very wealthy, and people connected with the Bolesław the Brave, the king of Poland in the early 11th century, and with the local PS ruling dynasty. By the late 12th century, though, the cemetery saw more and more burials of commoners, with over 2,500 skeletons recovered at the site of Ostrołębnicki Island. But in spite of the elite nature of the cemetery, its most famous resident is a woman from a lower social class who died in her late 20s. Writing recently in the book of new developments in the bioarchaeology of care, archaeologist Magdalena Matsak and Thomas Kozlowski detailed the intriguing skeleton and the odd nature of the grave. So it's the odd nature of the grave. While other burials are made with the head to the west, this woman's head faces east. There were no artifacts at all present with her body. Even the positioning of her body is strange, sloping at an angle with her left hand close to her skull, and right arm and left leg bent instead of extended. Okay, so based on what I've learned so far, from all the burials that occurred in the Americas, the finds of these large skeletal remains in the past, and all the odd ways that they were buried, sitting, standing, crouched, heads bent forward, leaning to the west, pointing to the west, in a wheel, all these different positionings, including ones that's similar to this one right here. Perhaps this woman was buried at a time totally disassociated to any of the times that they're referring to. Okay, since human beings have been on this planet for a while, and these humanoids maybe even further into the past, and who knows what the heck the past is anyway. All right, this one instance here that they found among these other burials could be something that from a totally different time period and an isolated burial at the time that it was done. It had nothing to do and not associated with any of these people. These are assumptions that they are making. So they have sort of illustration of it here. Burial of woman with gigantism. And again, they have to mention gigantism over and over and over again because so you get the idea that that's what it is. There's no such thing as giants, according to them, and couldn't be because of everything that they talk about it. But the only problem is that even today they can't have no explanation for anybody of unusual height any place on this planet, like the Frisians, like the chiefs of the Fiji Islands and the Watusi. They have no explanation. Okay, well, chiefs of the Fiji Islands and the Watusi eating the same exact stuff as all the rest of the people are for centuries and centuries and millennia and millennia. Okay, nobody's increased in height or decreased in height and all kind of stuff. They're full of crap. Okay, and we know it since we're not growing anymore. The most impressive thing about the woman, though, is her height. 215.5 centimeter or 7 foot 2 inches. Her bones are normally proportioned. They're normally proportioned, just very, very large, meaning she almost certainly suffered from gigantism. It does. It almost certainly means that. Hmm, I don't think so. Which is when the pituitary gland overproduces growth hormone and causes people to grow between 7 and 9 feet tall. Okay, guys, so you can forget about the skeletal remains that were found. We just heard about it. Okay, and the rest of the article here is going to be about gigantism and acromegaly. Okay, this is the focus of all these articles with these large skeletal remains that are uncovered. Okay, they're associating them with societies that that are completely no relationship to these skeletal remains because of civilization built upon civilization through all of the ancient past. Okay, so now it's an article about gigantism and acromegaly. That's all it's about. Okay, you heard a little bit about the skeletal remains, and that's it. You're done. Okay, now we're going to hear all about gigantism and all its effects and repercussions. Okay. She also suffers from acromegaly, not only gigantism, but acromegaly too, which has a similar cause, but which occurs after the growth plates of the bones have closed, making the bones of the head larger. Okay, so none of these people are going to ever consider that these are recessive gene sets that exist within human beings, all these mystery DNA, and now they're finding this and finding that. The more they look, the more they find. Okay, this seems to be what it is to me, that these are expressing themselves in these people who come from these areas, and hearing all about it again and again about people from these areas on average are taller than many of the people around in other outlying areas in these countries. Okay, they never consider this, that these recessive genes are going to express themselves, these giant genes, these large hominids and humanoids that were actually hybrids. And it's always, when I talked to Harry Hubbard in our private conversations on the phone, he was like, as far as he was concerned, the real giants are the ones that are like 16 feet and up. Okay, and in a way, he's right. As far as I'm concerned, those probably were the actual giants from the ancient past before they evolved and created all sorts of hybrids as their species basically was dying out because of the gravity change on the planet. All right, and the ones that we consider all that are under those heights, so let's say somewhere between 7 foot and 16 feet tall, are all the hybrid species of these large humanoid types that were existing over millennia, and all sorts of hybrids were going on. From near as I could tell, from all of these accounts, all sorts of hybrids with all sorts of morphologies. Okay, and phenotypes, all sorts of things going on. Apparently, you pretty much take that as a given. And let's go on. You want to hear more about Gigantism and Acromegaly? Here's where you got to come. Every single article where they find large skeletal remains, as opposed to the east. People with gigantism and acromegaly are well known throughout history, owing to the fact that it's difficult not to notice them. You've probably heard of Andre the Giant, either through his professional wrestling career or because of his role as Fezzik in the classic movie The Princess Bride. Andre's physical characteristics were caused by both gigantism and acromegaly. Women with gigantism and acromegaly are not as well known, though. Perhaps the most famous is Anna Swann, a 19th century Canadian woman who stood close to 8 foot tall and who married Martin Van Buren Bates, the Kentucky Giant. Their second child, a boy who lived for only 11 hours, was over 23 pounds at birth. And could it be that these recessive genes express themselves way back to a time where the gravity was different on this planet? And this is why this child could not survive. Okay, you talked about gravitational biology on the channel and how cells either grow or reduce in size depending on whether there's gravity or not. Okay, so when there's less gravity, cells grow bigger, and when there's more gravity, they grow smaller, like in current conditions today. And they often wonder how the uh, dinosaurs and other large, like the megafauna, even carry themselves around, how they could move around in our gravity, being that they were so extremely heavy. Okay, and it could have been one of the reasons, as things changed on this planet, that they were much more easier to hunt in later times when these sort of hybrid species were eating the land meats. But it seems to me that their diets were more marine based. But anyway, let's go on with this junk here, which is nonsense. And they show some pictures of these people here. The medieval Polish woman had other hallmarks of gigantism and acromegaly, according to bioarchaeologist Judita Julia Gladyskowska, Rzeska, Anna Wierzyńska, and Anna Sokol. Her spine showed evidence of degenerative joint disease. Okay, so lots of average sized people have degenerative joint disease with disc herniations throughout, probably as a result of her height and body weight. She had broken her right upper arm and left lower leg at some point in her life, and these can also be attributed to her condition because it affects bone mineral density and results in weak bones. Additionally, small nodes on her ribs suggest that she suffered from pleurisy, a lung inflammation, which we know that these people who suffer from gigantism are sickly, but not with pleurisy. Pleurisy is a bacterial disease problem that infects the lining of the lungs, and there's another one that also affects the lining of the heart. I mean, this could happen to anybody. It happened to me. I had pleurisy at one time. There's nothing that suggests gigantism. You see? All right, and what is this article about? A large Polish lady is found, or gigantism? Gigantism, again, we got to go on about it. Gigantism and acromegaly are also commonly associated with diabetes, hypertension, headache, sleep apnea, skin changes, swelling of the tongue, and in females, menstrual dysfunction and psychiatric problems. These issues don't leave marks on the bone, of course, but Matisak and Kozlowski write that given the correlation between acromegaly and mental disorders and gigantism and intellectual impairment, it is possible that the woman with gigantism from Australia suffered from mental or cognitive dysfunction. Pure 100% speculation on their part. Okay, they have no idea. They just said at the beginning of it, they don't know. But here's what we think. All right, because we know she has gigantism and acromegaly, could not be possibly another type of humanoid species from the past. No, no, no. Buried in a different way than all the other people buried in the gravesite, et cetera, et cetera. Look, guys, can't you see through this thing? All right. The combination of skeletal trauma and potential psychological issues meant that this medieval Polish woman likely needed at least occasional support from her friends, family, or community. At the very least, her leg fracture, which was well healed at her death, meant she was resting and recuperating for several months, presumably while someone else helped care for her, like her family, for instance. Come on. Maskak and Kozlowski add up the skeletal and burial evidence to conclude that during her lifetime, she may have been subject to different treatment by her community because of her physical abnormalities and or possible psychological or cognitive problems. She may have, okay? Just listen to this, guys, okay? He's fabricating, spinning this yarn, okay, that could did a whole bunch of sweaters for a herd of elephants, okay? That's what these people do. Okay, and push this whole, agenda-driven gigantism, acromegaly thing because there can't be any of these sort of giant humanoids from the past at all, and they don't know anything about the past. It can't be because they know everything. They dug up every square inch of the planet, and they know everything. Prior to the 19th century, gigantism was not well known, which makes this Polish giantess quite intriguing. Francesco Galassi, who has studied gigantism and acromegaly from both a medical and paleopathological perspective, told me that this find expands our limited knowledge of the evolution of the morphology of these two incapacitating and stigmatizing conditions. Galassi noted that he would like to see genetic analysis undertaken on the skeleton and other ancient skeletons around the world with the same conditions to better elucidate the pathophysiology of these complex endocrine disorders. Yes, that would be very nice if that's indeed what it is. Okay. So, I mean, anything could be identified as this, that, or the other thing. We're talking about a completely different species of humanoid, right? That they don't acknowledge. See, that's the problem. Whereas in the Asian articles, they're perfectly willing to acknowledge a different, species of humanoid in the past. Here, we're not going to be able to entertain that in the West because it's closed. The issue is closed, thanks to people like Alice Herdlisker, who's clearly out of his effing mind. The giant is not the only medieval Polish skeleton that belonged to someone a little bit different than the rest of the population. A person with achondroplasia, dwarfism, has also been found in Ostroleniki, and a woman with leprosy was discovered in nearby Kaldis. Okay, so this is not relative to this at all, and why they interject with this is nonsense. Okay, so they found a dwarf and they found somebody with leprosy. Oh, wow, it's what? So what? Just to show that, just, oh, we have other individuals here. And according to this guy, anyway, this person here, did he know about the Italian skeleton, that the large skeletal remains, that the Italian that I covered on his channel, where, you know, of course, again, suffering from gigantism, but he was like a play toy for the Romans, so he was entertaining them. Even though he's dying of his ailments there, and they forced him to dance around and all this kind of stuff, and he was buried in this very special grave for, I guess, for kicks and shits and giggles. Yeah, okay. Although some of these berries are slightly different in form or orientation, they were all made among others in their community and were therefore not seen as misfits or outcasts, which is probably wrong. And he did not bury with the members of the community, and the people who are buried with them in these other style berries have nothing to do with it. We frequently heard about these secondary remains being found in the mounds in the Americas and also in Europe as well. Okay, they know all about these secondary remains. Okay, people thought this is a great place to bury people, and even to the point where graveyards were built around some of the mound areas there, because hey, that's where dead people are buried. Matzak and Kozlowski conclude their essay by noting that their aim is to present a wider view of aspects of life in medieval society, including care, emotion, social perception, status of disease and the disabled, and the meaning of burial ritual. Using archaeological and biological evidence, they have shown how a visibly different person may have experienced life and trauma more than 6 centuries ago. Okay, and every other fairy tale that you can possibly imagine. Okay, this is a complete fairy tale made up by these people. Okay, there's no truth in it whatsoever. It's all may have and could have and might have been and could have been. Okay, anybody can make up anything, especially if they have preconceived notions before examining these things to begin with. You see? So, look, I mean, it's like clear as day, the contrast in these articles here, the ones from the east and these ones we hear about in the west, where they automatically go to gigantism. And the article was basically about gigantism. I'd say, you know, 2/3 of the article was about gigantism and acromegaly, okay, and nothing to do with this lady or whatever, okay. They made up some stories about her based on what their preconceived notions are about the skeletal remains. Did they do a complete medical analysis to determine these things? I mean, no. Okay. You see the difference in the articles and sort of information that they include in the articles, the way this is reported. Science reporting is done in the West, and the way science reporting is done in the East. Okay, relevant material is given in the Eastern articles there, where, as in the Western articles, we're going to go on about fantasy stories about people who suffer from gigantism and acromegaly, because that's the only thing it could possibly be. Despite the fact of the people existing today who are giants, basically, in some of these areas. So, look, guys, I just wanted to go over these articles with you and again present to you these sort of differences and contrasts in the way these archaeological and anthropological um, news reporting is done, science reporting is done in the East and the West here, and how these people in Asia are not contaminated by this whole ideological argument between religion and trying to prove the Bible right, and you know these people who are, academics and scientists are totally against that, or anti-religion, or whatever it might be. It's all fuddled up by all that stuff, and we can't get the straight story out of it because we're involved with this whole thing, including the belief in the Anunnaki and the Nephilim and all this kind of other stuff. Okay, we're not going to get to the bottom of it by going to those. I feel so bad in a lot of different ways because people probably look at my videos and they're just turned off by the whole thing. Okay, they want to go with the History Channel narrative or any of these cockamamie people and authors who made millions of dollars off their own fantasy stories about the giants, whatever it may be, cannibalism and the like, and all these fanciful things that are made up about them. Okay, so I I'm going to speak my mind and the truth that I feel is being spoken to me by these things, and I don't care about any of those things. Okay, we all know it's some sort of agenda. If you're seeing it in a mainstream forum like a History Channel or mainstream textbooks or whatever it is, okay, it's nothing but a bunch of gibberish. All right, this is not what the story is. The story of the past is more complex and more convoluted than you think. And the evidence is there, but we let these professional academics, okay, these, empty degrees for university tell us what the past is based on their own fantasies. All right. And we've allowed them to get away with this stuff. This is one of the things that H.L. Mencken was talking about. All right. So anyway, I hope you could appreciate the contrast there in these articles from East and West, and just keep it in mind when you come across other material. Again, another article. I didn't have to say it, did I? I never reported on this article before about this Polish giant, and right away it's gigantism and acromegaly. It can't be anything else. You don't see any in-depth study of the skeletal remains, but it's gotta be. It's gotta be because I went to college, right? So, look, guys, you call it what, you make the call on your own, okay? I'm just presenting this to you, and I can't help but notice the contrast and the type of science reporting that's being done here. And I hope you appreciate it as well and understand where we're going with this, all right? So, anyway, guys, Budcat7 signing off. Peace.